This is interesting. Hi there. Trying to work this out here. I don't know how I'm doing this. Let me see how this goes. I know you can hear me. That's the scary part. What? Okay. Can you hear me now? Okay. I'm ready. Thank you. All right. That's the scary part. Well, let me take this off. It's kind of. Well, I want to thank you for me being here and for you being here, because it's a very special time for me to be with others that are moving through loss, that are moving through this time where we gather. And one of my favorite proverbs is deep calls to deep. And that's what we do. We go into the depths. And when I first in my loss, it was long before they died, and just to share some of the progression of that, it was a transfusion, and she would receive the blood 10 hours before our son was born, our first son. And she didn't even need the transfusion. It was precautionary. She had had seizures, and we got to the hospital, and I remember the doctor coming in and said, in case we need to do a cesarean, we need to give her platelets. We didn't do the cesarean, and she didn't need the platelets. But I remember that conversation. I remember that for some reason. I didn't know what platelets were, but I remembered that. And then when 10 hours after Matt was, 10 hours before Matt was born, then after he was born, they fed him too quickly and his bowel wall broke. And that's how we think he got infected. And so we didn't know, and when I walked in to the intensive care, the doctor had just told me that Matt probably wouldn't live through the night, our oldest child. And I sat there with him in the intensive care, and I was holding his hand was around my finger, and he was heaving for every breath. And during the pregnancy, I would go up to Lydia's womb, and I would go, "Hello, this is Papa, and I love you." And he would stick his butt up, and I'd rub it, and she told me to stop that. But anyway, so it was bothering her. But when I was in the intensive care next to him, I leaned over, and I said, "Hello, this is Papa, and I love you." And he squeezed my finger. And at that moment, this bond between Matt and I was phenomenal. There was always a part of me that I wanted to hold back. I had gone through losses before, and I always wanted to hold back a little piece of me. And at that moment, there was nothing to hold back. And we went through life in an incredibly beautiful way. But it was very difficult. I have a rose here. And this rose, for me, and first off I want to say Jason bought the rose. I met Jason yesterday, and he brought this to me. I thought, could we find a rose? He went out and searched for a rose. He's not from Indianapolis, and thank you, Jason. But this is symbolic for me in many, many ways. One of the ways is that Jason went and got the rose, that I am not alone. That there are people in my life, there are people in our lives that show up at incredibly important times, and they are there, that they may not know, they've never gone. I had a friend that after Lydia was about to die, and I had a friend who said, "I've never experienced death, I've never had that, but I'm here for you." And I love that authenticity. I love that being there. And one of the things I say is that the people that have never gone through loss don't know what to say. And the people that have gone through loss know there's nothing that can be said. Because there's something in that deep that calls to deep, that we go to a place that's beyond words. I'll tell you where that place is. That place, for me, they talk about when people die going into the afterlife. And I decided that for me, I wasn't in the life of before. That had changed. I'll never have that back. So where am I? And I felt that I am in the world of the after loss. And that's why I have in the book, Healing in the After Loss. And let me explain something to you about healing in my perception. Healing is not getting over something. Healing is not moving on. Healing is not being able to go back to the way it was before. Healing for me is to be able to live in peace with the pain. Healing for me is to be able to make my way through a day and be of service and be of love and carry that hurt, but carry that hurt in a sacred place. Carry that hurt in a way that is transformative of life. That's healing for me. So healing in the afterloss is very much what I have done. I just want to share with you just kind of why the rose. I might as well tell you why the rose. And by the way, purple was Lydia's favorite color, obviously, the color of the woman of purple. This was her favorite color. And this is actually the color that she had on her dress after our wedding. I had known Lydia since I was 11 years old. And we certainly wanted to have children like the last speaker. That was a part of our journey and our joy, was to have children. And this rose is very symbolic of where memory touches moment. And this is where it intersects, right in this petal of a rose. Because every anniversary of their births and of their deaths, I would go and I would take a rose and I would go to the ocean, or I'd go to a body of water, and I would take off a petal. And this I would do with each individual. I'd take off a petal and I would think of a beautiful memory. And I would think of this, and that's where memory intersects with moment, because nothing is ever over. We don't move through, we don't move on with something. We move through it and we move in it. And so when I take this petal and I think of a memory, and then I kiss the petal, and I drop it into the water, and I say thank you. This is a ceremony and this is a ritual that I have about how I express my sorrow, my joy, my being connected. We're always connected. And I think that the part about the healing for me is it will be the rest of my life in this unfolding. Let me just go back and share some of the things of the memories. And one thing I was thinking, do I have some linear kind of structure to this talk or this kind of sharing? I said, no, grief is not linear. Grief is not, nice and sweet. So when memories show up, I honor that. One of the biggest things for me is that to lean into every moment, every feeling, every experience, to lean into it with that authenticity and honesty and feel what I need to feel. My resistance is my pain. And when I move into that, it will always take me to healing. Wherever I go, whatever I do. And there are days when I can't do anything, but there's nothing that I can do. And there's still days like that. And I remember, and this is part of a kiss in the rose here that I'll drop in the... After they had all died, I moved to Mendocino from Dallas, and I knew one person there, and then I started meeting people, and this one guy came over to the house, and I had nothing. I was not a father anymore, I was not a husband anymore, I'd quit my job, and I was sitting there going, who am I? What am I doing here? Why am I still here? And so he comes over and he says, we're all really worried about you. He says, what do you do all day? And I said, I don't know, but it takes me all day to do it. And that's what it did. I just inched my way through life, through this afterloss, through this labyrinth of pain, of questioning. But the questioning started when we first found out, when we first got the phone call. The questioning started when Lydia, the birth happened and she almost died. She had massive seizures. She didn't even remember the birth because she was in those seizures and for 48 hours. And we got out. Matt was in intensive care for a month because they had to take out 3/4 of his bowel, and he sat there in the intensive care, and one of us was always with him. And so in that whole kind of dynamic, there was always that questioning. What is going on? What did I do? The last speaker talked about guilt. I went through so much guilt. And when we found out about our second child, and he was going to die if he went full term. So they did a cesarean 2 months early. He lived. He was in the intensive care for a month. It was the same thing over and over again. And once again, one of us was always with him. We didn't know about the HIV at that point. At 5 months old, Brian was 5 months old, and we got a call from the blood bank, and they asked us all to be tested. And we went to get tested, and after the test, and this is a pedal that I will kiss, because we went and got tested, and I had showed up to the doctor's office in my car from work, and she was already there with the kids, and Matt was about 2.5, Brian was 5 months, and we all got tested, and she went off in one car, and I went in one car, and Matt was in my car, and Brian was in the car seat next to Lydia, and we stopped at an intersection, and I looked over at her, and there was this look of desperation. She looked out at Brian, she looked up, and then she looked at me. And the distance between us, that I couldn't hold her, I couldn't hug her, and we knew that something was wrong. We had gone to so many specialists saying, something's wrong, something's wrong. When Matt was born and Lydia got home, a couple of weeks after, she said, I feel like something has died inside of me, but I don't know what it is. And then when we got the call, and when we found out about the test, she said, well, at least we know. At least we know what it is. We walked through that time with Brian, and this is a kiss for Brian, because Brian taught me something that he gave me a glimpse at what life is really all about. He gave me that chance to in the expansion. What part of my understanding of this after loss is that when someone dies, part of me goes with them. That's that missing part. That's that part that will never be filled. That's the empty space. And part of my belief system now is that the empty space is the most important space. The most important space in a cup is the empty part, because that's what you can fill. But that empty space hurts. And that empty space that I will carry the rest of my life, I carry it with sacredness, I carry it with honor, I carry it with joy, I carry it with sadness, I carry it. That part of me is missing. But that part of me is not lost, it is simply missing. And part of my understanding is that it is part of this reintegration, because part of them stays with me. And part of me goes with them. And I'm not the same person. I'll never be the same person. I don't want to be the same person. It's a reintegration. Every day there's a reintegration process going on. And it's a finding it. And somebody asked me once in an interview, they said, well, what part of you goes with them? What happens there? Where does that go? And I say it goes into the expanse. That I step into the expanse every time I take a breath. That part of me goes into that larger context, larger, Ken talked about last night of being the embodiment, but I look at it a little, the same, but it's different for me, is that how it works for me is that I look at it, is that I am still carrying that part they left me. That part they gave me, that gift, that is still them, and I feel like I'm just stretched across the universe. And that's what that reintegration process is. Living in the after loss is, how do I go into this whole new world and relate it to the world that was before, and relate it to the world that is, and relate it to what shows up, and that I'll always be out of sync. I used to think, oh man, am I ever going to turn the corner? When am I going to turn the corner? When will I come back? And then I realized there are no corners. There's no going back. And I realized that this is part of my journey now, is to experience life in the expanse, in the infinite, and in the finiteness. And to balance that is part of that stepping in my after loss, going through the trails, the trials, the tribulations, the tributaries of my after loss. And wherever it takes me, I go. And that's what I do. So Brian, one of the greatest gifts Brian gave me was at the moment of his death, was when we walked in Lydia was already in the hospital, and Brian was the only one that died in the hospital. We didn't know we knew he was going to die. We didn't know, but you always want one more day. You always want that. You always think, well, I have one more day. There'll be one more day. There'll be one more day. We didn't get that day. And Brian, when I took Matt and I took him into the little play area, and I walked in, and Lydia had Brian on her shoulder, and she had this, like she always did. And Brian was still warm, still there, and she looked at me and said, "He's dead." And Brian gave me something that day. He gave me the gift of the expanse. What he did, as I held his body and he was growing cold, I felt him say, "It's okay. I understand now." When Brian never got to be, he never crawled, he never could hold his head up. He was this beautiful little baby, 8 months old. People say, "Well, how old is he? How old is so beautiful?" Oh, he's 8 months. They go, "Oh, there was something wrong there," and we knew it. We had to live in secret and silence because of the stigma of HIV at that time, the fear. There were people that were burning houses of children with HIV. And so we had to live in secret. We had to live in fear that if somebody found out, we will be attacked. It was a horrible sociological situation, spiritual situation, mental, emotional, all of it was in play. And so as I was holding Brian, and there was this sense of moving into this totally the after loss in such a palatable way. But what I did when Brian was younger and still alive, I would hold him, and he was in pain 45 minutes out of an hour. We could give him pain medication every 4 hours. It lasted about 45 minutes, and then he would just be screaming and crying. And I would rock him. And I would hold him, and he would be scratching at my chest, and I would just be singing to him, and I would be envisioning this love that would be around him. Because what I wanted was, when he died, that he would step into that dimension and say, "I know this love. My Father gave me this love." I wanted him not to miss that rhythm of love that happens with us when we connect. And so I would hold him, and I would rock him, and I would sing to him. And just one of the things that I used at that time was that it was like a train going off the station, and to step in that rhythm of the train so I could pass him to that next part of life. And when I was holding him and his body was growing cold, he gave me the gift of saying, "I know this love." Every time I do this ceremony, that's one of the biggest kiss of the rose petal. And it's memory touching moment. Yesterday I was on the plane coming, and I'm always happy. What kills me is when people don't appreciate what they have. That's what hurts. But when a father or a mother appreciates what they have, and I go, yeah, they got it. That's the gift. I don't have any bitterness. I don't have any jealousy. I don't compare my life to anybody's. That does me no good. And so what I do, but anyway, on the plane yesterday, it was just totally symbolic. There was a baby right in the seat right in front of me, and then 2 rows down there was a little boy about 3 or 4, one of my favorite ages of Matt. And he was going, "Look, an airplane, an airplane." And he was so excited. And the baby was just real nice and quiet and just beautiful. And she stood up. She had this beautiful baby on her shoulder. And I said, "Thank you. Thank you." I says, "She knows. She knows." And that's what the gift of this is, being in the expanse. Is that I don't carry the bitterness. I know that there's more than this realm. I know that there's more, that I live in that place of compassion, place of love. And Brian gave me that. That was my first death that I really found that kind of power. That was very healing for me. And so Brian died, and then Lydia lived 4 years longer. And we knew Lydia was going to die before Matt, and we knew that she was in the deterioration. We didn't tell Matt. Oh, I want to go back. Like I said, grief isn't linear. There's another element that was powerful for Brian, is that when we did a graveside service for Brian, and we didn't have any money, and there was a grave that my grandfather, he died in '85, but right before he died, he said, I have an extra plot if Brian needs it. And I said, we didn't know about the HIV. He's not going to die. Thanks, but no thanks. I think we'll pass on that. But that's all we had in this town that I didn't know much about. And because, I didn't ever live there. I visited my grandparents there. But he said, no, if he needs it. But that's all we had. So we had a graveside service there. And we went in, and we drove up, and Matt was just 3, and he jumped out of the car, and he was all happy and everything, and he went and he sat down. I followed him, obviously, and I sat down next to him at the front, in front of the casket. He goes, where's the cake? And I said, what do you mean, where's the cake? And I said, well, where's the cake? He said, because every time all the family was gathered, it was a birthday party, and he was looking for the cake. And for many, many years after that, in my deepest sorrow, I would go, where's the cake? Where's the cake? And that was a Matt gift. That was a Matt gift. Where's the cake? And I kept searching in my afterloss for the cake. And I found the cake. It was always there. But I had to go into that deep, deep darkness to find the beauty of the cake. And that was one of Matt's gifts. After the funeral, we went back to try to help Matt to see some of the finality. And so we went back to the grave, and there's a mound over the grave the next day. And we walked up, and it was just Lydia, Matt, and I. And he went over there, and he started trying to take the dirt off. And he was going, let's take Brian home now. And I said, Matt, we can't. And I said to him, he said, Matt, you know how you're learning to swim right now? I said, yeah. And he was. I was taking swimming lessons. I said, you know when you take off your shoes, you don't need your shoes when you go swimming? He said, yeah. Yes. I said, well, that's kind of like death. It says, when you die, you don't need your body anymore. And Brian's not in his body anymore. And I said, oh, okay. So we left. That was a Matt gift. That was a Brian gift. Brian taught me that I don't need this body. I'm here for a moment, and I'm gone. And that was a gift that Brian gave me and Matt. So I sit there by the ocean and I reflect, and I go through this process. Lydia gave me so many gifts. Like I said, we met when I was 11. She was 13, she was an older woman. And we actually didn't get together. We didn't get together until I was 20 and she was 40. But math is not one of my greater skills. But she always talked about being the older woman. And we got together, and we were so excited. And I remember the first night we really connected, and we laughed and we laughed and we laughed. I don't remember a thing we laughed about, but I remember the laughter. I said, she's the one. She's the one I want to be with, because I want to laugh. I want to laugh in life. So when I think of Lydia, I think of the laughter. I think of the joy. I think of the vivaciousness, the wisdom she had was incredible. And I kiss her for a specific memory of that night, the laughter. And I throw it in the water. She was a remarkable woman. She was a nurse. And so she studied everything, trying to find out how we could save Brian was so close. It was 3 months that we had. 3 months, it felt like 3 years, 3 centuries before he died. But she did everything to try to save Matt's life, and to all the research and all the medication and all those things. And Lydia was the kind of person that just went on with life and knew. And so she taught me how to and this is part of the expanse, and this is what she left me. She left me the ability to lean into life and to say, this is life. She didn't fight it. She didn't scream and yell. She didn't say, oh, woe is me. She said, okay, now what do I do? I get to keep that. I got to keep that when she was close to death, and we walked through that process, and we knew she was going to die. And I got to keep all of those things. You know, I was thinking the greatest memories are the small memories. I don't think of the Disneylands and all those kind of things. I think of just a sunset. She couldn't walk very well, but she wanted to go see a sunset. So we got in the car, drove to the edge of town, and watched the sun go down. That's what I remember. I remember a moment with a sunset. I got my tools of the trade here, but those are the kind of things. And when Lydia was close to dying, she did some videos for Matt. She read The Little Prince. She did that, and Matt was really into dolphins. And Matt loved dolphins, and so we got 3 dolphins. I went. It was so close she couldn't get up and go anywhere, but I went and I shopped for dolphins, and I found these brass dolphins, these 3 dolphins, and so that was her gift to Matt. So in the video, she said, "I want to give you this gift," and Matt had it in his room for as long as he was alive. I still have it, and in my office. And she said that was the hardest thing she ever did, was to go through this process of these videos to leave for Matt. But she did it. That's another kiss. She taught me how to just be present and go through this. And I don't know how. I don't know how she did it. She had the hardest journey, I think, of all of us, because we had a child that died, and she was so close to Brian, and he never made it to his first birthday. And actually, a story there, like I said, is not linear, so bear with me. But it was Mother's Day, his first birthday. How cruel can that be? Mother's Day, and May 13th. And so we decided to plant a tree in the front of the house, and so in honor of Brian, because what we were doing was trying to teach Matt about life and death. And most parents get to teach their children how to live, and I had to teach Matt how to die. I had to teach him that death was just a part of life, because I knew he was going to die. It was like with Brian, I did not want Matt to walk in without that rhythm of love. I wanted that to be the pace of life, and that it was just, this is part of the expansion. This is part of the, so we planted a tree, and we sang Happy Birthday to a child that never made his first birthday. And at the end, Matt goes, "And many more." And then he looked up and went, "Oh." And we laughed and we hugged him and said, "Oh, yeah, it's all right, Matt. That's cool." But what we did, and then after that, the anniversaries, we would set off balloons. Then Matt thought that is not environmentally sound, and he was like 4 when he really, okay. And it was true. It was not environmentally sound. So that's where we got the rose, and that's where we would do the rose ceremony. Matt and I would do the rose ceremony for Lydia. We would go and we would take a rose. Let's think of a great memory of Mama. But it's a daily memory. It's not just at the anniversary. This is very healing for me. I don't know about you, but about a week or 2 before the anniversaries, I'm immobilized. I just like, put it on the calendar, not functional, and that's okay. It's okay not to be functional. I have no problem with that. I don't care what somebody says, you got to get up and get going. He says, no, I don't. Because when something of that magnitude comes into my, consciousness, I don't need to go on, I need to go in. I need to go deeper. I need to stop. I need to be in that stillness. There was this image that I had, 2 images back when it was going on, and I felt so alone. There weren't a lot of fathers around in the HIV epidemic at that point that had 3 children, 2 children and a wife that were dying, and I felt incredibly alone. We had to live in secret because we were afraid for Matt's safety. And the image that I got was and you may identify with this, because the image that I got was being in this, out in space, and I'm old enough to remember where the Apollos, where the astronaut was out and out of the spacecraft, but he was linked to a hose. And I had this image of being that astronaut and somebody cutting the hose. And I was drifting off so far from the planet. And I had one breath left, and I said, do I scream as loud as I can with this last breath that no one will hear, or do I hold it as long as I can? That's how I felt. That's the kind of aloneness and isolation. And when part of what Lydia and I did through that process was to break down that isolation for others. She started a house for children with AIDS because we found that they weren't accepted in schools. Matt wasn't accepted in a lot of places, but it wasn't for us. It was because I was working with the Interfaith Network, and I would go and I would sit with people, anybody, everybody that asked just for somebody to sit with them as they were going through this. And one of the people that I sat with was a woman named Lynn. And Lynn had 2 children that were HIV negative, and she was positive, and she was pretty sick, and she had no care. And Lydia said, I want to start a house for children that are affected by HIV, either personally or by parent. And she started that house. And we didn't know this, but they named it Brian's house, and we weren't planning on that, but that was very touching. But she started that house, and she worked at the Children's Hospital with children of HIV and parents with HIV. And oftentimes she was far sicker than the clients, but they didn't know. She didn't tell them. She just went on and on and on. And, and I worked with people, and I would sit with them and we'd walk through the process, and they wouldn't know. And we would just sit and we would go through, and I would walk with them to that time of transition, that time of death, whatever you want to call it. I'm not caught up on words. But it was the gift that we were given was saying, we have been given a gift of this moment. What can we give back? And that started very early with us. And it continued on. It continued on until Lydia died. That was something. She gave me the gift of giving. And she gave so much. But she had the hardest time of all because our child had already died. And the tragedy of that never goes away. As you know, I'm glad I'm in a room where deep calls to deep, where we know. We know. And then she was going to die. And she was going to leave a child that was going to die in the same way, in the same pain that she was in. And have to leave that child for me to take care of, to go into the last part of the process. We had many conversations about suffering. And she asked me at the end of her life, says, just don't let him suffer. And how do we define suffering? How do we say, this hurts, this doesn't for another? And I said to her, I cannot define suffering for Matt. I cannot define suffering for you. But I will do whatever I can that he knows love. And she knew that. So we had many, many conversations. At the end of her life, we talked quite a bit about things, and she said her spiritual path had moved in a different direction. She started letting go, and she started moving in a different way, and I moved in a different way of how to articulate and relate to spirit. And we were doing our own things, and Matt had his own way of relating to spirit, which was quite interesting. I'll tell you about in a minute. But we were talking about a couple of weeks before she died, and I said, I kind of feel like in my belief system that I'm not here to do anything. I'm here to experience something. And out of the experience, doing happens. But it's not here. I'm not here to do anything. And she kind of looked at me and said, well, I kind of feel the same way. And I said, so what have you come here to experience? And she said, well, right now, I've come here to experience how to let go. I said, how to let go, and she said, how to let go of me and how to let go of Matt. And I said to her, I said, well, have you learned that? Have you had that experience? She looked at me and says, not yet. She was real. She couldn't let go. I know that same feeling. When Matt was close to dying, I couldn't let go. I couldn't release him. We were so close, and he was so emaciated, and he couldn't walk. The dementia was he was coming in and out, and the bed sores and all this stuff. And talk about pictures. I have pictures because I couldn't see it. I could see he wanted to live to be a teenager, and he lived a month after his 13th birthday. He had determination, but that I could not let him go. And I had to go into how I experience the expanse. How do I experience this being here? And what I realized, and this is a kiss that Matt gave me, but what I realized was that I had wrapped up my entire life into this child. From the time he held my hand. And the day before he died, like I said, it's not linear. The day before he died, I held the same hand as he was laying in bed, and he was at home, and I held that hand. He was out. He was unconscious or asleep, one or the other at that point. And I leaned over and I said, "Hello, this is Papa, and I still love you." And I couldn't let go. I couldn't let him go, and he wasn't going to go until I could let go. Because I asked him in that last day, and I always thought I had one more. But in that last day, I leaned over and I said, "Matt, when do you want to die?" And he couldn't open his eyes at that point. He could barely whisper, and he said to me, "I want to die when you die." And that was one of my biggest pains, was I could not give him that. I couldn't give him that. I wanted to give him that, but I couldn't give him that. And I had to learn to let go. I had to let him go. And what I have found is that it's not just what I need to let go of, it's what I need to let go into. And I found spirit, I found the expanse, whatever articulation you have, that's how I articulate it, that I had to let go into spirit. Lydia and I talked many, many times about that. I'll be on this side, you be on that side when we pass our child over. Matt was always into Greek mythology. Every night we read him a book. This is another thing Lydia gave me that blew me away. We just got him home after the intensive care for a month and a half, the major surgeries, the in and out, and we got him home, on a heart monitor, all this kind of medical stuff all around. And she said, and we put him in the crib. I said, "Okay, let's read him a book." I looked at him, he's a month old. I said, "No, we're reading him a book." Lydia said, every night we read him a book. And I read him a story every night for 13 years. And the last year or two of his life, he was really into Greek mythology. He loved Greek mythology for some reason, because he could pick any book he wants, and he always picked this book about Greek mythology, and we'd read a story about one of the gods or one of the stories and all, and he just loved that. And also at night, we had a ritual, we'd read a book, and he listened to whales. He would, I don't know why, this is Matt, it's his life, his journey, and he would listen to whales. This was years, and he'd listen to this tape with whales. And one time I said to him, "Well, have you figured out what they're saying yet? Have you figured out what they're saying?" He goes, "Not yet." but I don't know why, that's how he could sleep, was listening to whales. But we'd read a book, and he was really into Greek mythology. And so at the end of his life, he could still walk at this point, because he was coming down the hallway. And he looked at me, and he was going through the dementia. He was coming in and out of that. And he said to me, he said, "Herod is the goddess of wind and the goddess of love." And I said, "Oh, really?" I said, "She was neither in the books, but that's what." I said, "Well, that's great." And then he looked at me and says, "Who do you think will come first?" And I said, "Well, maybe Mercury. Maybe Mercury will come first. Maybe Mama will come first." And he looked at me and said, "Yeah, Mama will come first." And the night he died, I want to tell you this. Right the day before he died, we were sitting and I was laying down next to him in the bed, and he looked up at the distance and he said, "What'd he say?" I said, "Who say, Matt?" He says, "What did the man say?" And I go, What man? He says, the African American man. What did he say? He was starting to get mad at me. And I said, well, I don't know. And I said, he specifically said, the African American man. What did he say? And I said, I don't know. Who is he? And he listened for a minute. He says he's the boatman. And part of the river Styx in Greek mythology is the boatman comes and takes him across the river. And I said, and then I realized, so what did the boatman say? And he said, he listened for again. He says, he said he will guide us safely. And then Matt, being his mother's child, said, well, I don't know about that. I said, no, Matt, trust the boatman. He will guide us safely. But he said he will guide us safely. And I've carried that for a long time. Why us? Why not him? And what I realized that Spirit is guiding us safely. You know, that is a part of the continuation. Death is not, for me, different from life. It is a part of life. And that's what we had to teach Matt. Every anniversary, every time. You know, Matt would have a cough at one time, and he coughed. And one year, we was on some medication, and he threw up every day. And I would sit there over the toilet with him, just rub his back as he threw up. And he had this cough at one point, and he looked at me and says, am I always going to have this cough? And I said, no, you're not always going to have this cough. And we both knew what that meant. You know, it's a transition time. It's an expansion. My life has been so expanded. It's so powerful to be able to step into this moment knowing there's more here. There's more here. The after loss has taught me that it's an ever-expanding universe, that Spirit is always with me, that they are always with me, that I am not the same, that I don't look back and go, oh, I wish I'd had this. What I look for is, I wish I could see more into this. I want to see more. I want to be in this moment. Where memory and moment meet is where I live every moment. And it's not about going into the past. It's about being on that airplane and seeing that child and going, yes, that mama knows. That mama knows what she's got. That's beautiful. You know, that's how I want to live my life. That's what I've been taught by the ones that I love, is that love never ends. That's what I get to keep. But how I love is what I got to go with them. How I expand, how I live, how I see life. So Matt, at the end of his life, he, like I said, I always thought I had one more day. I was up at 2 in the morning, I was up at 2 in the morning. And I had a couple hours sleep that night. And about 7:30 that evening, I was so exhausted. I'd laid down next to him, and I went to sleep. One of my biggest desires that I had was I wanted to go the distance. Wherever it took me, I wanted to go the distance. I took that philosophy and that emphasis in my life with Matt to go the distance to I want to go the distance with whatever I'm feeling. Wherever it takes me, I lean into it, I lean honestly into it. Whatever it is, I will go there, no matter how dark, no matter how sad, no matter how empty, no matter how full, I will go there. When they all died and I had nothing left, all I had was my grief. And I said, I will go there. I will go wherever it takes me. And so, and I'll tell you where it took me. But so I fell asleep at 8:30. At 8:30, exactly, there was a huge windstorm in Dallas, and the wind bashed up against the window. It didn't break it, but it bashed up, and I woke up, and I looked over, and he had 2 breaths left. It was about a year after that I reflected that Herod was the goddess of wind and the goddess of love. It was about a year or 2 later, I went, whoa. And then Mama came first. And in that windstorm. This is the hard part. They didn't leave me hanging. If he had died and I was asleep, I would have been devastated. He was everything to me. And they didn't leave me. It was like a thank you. It was a passing over. It was like, she came and she said, I got him now. We're good to go. I got him now. And it was the worst moment of my life. When I woke up, 2 breaths left, the panic, it was unbelievable. It was nothing like I'd hoped it would have been. But you know what? Matt needed that hour to let go. I needed that hour to let go because I couldn't. I did my best, but I couldn't. And I had to go to sleep so he could move on. And so I understand that. It's okay, but I'm so grateful that Lydia came first. And she woke me just in time. Where I went after that, I went to Mendocino, I moved, I didn't know anybody, I didn't have anything left but my grief. And what I found there was that these waves, these tsunamis of sorrow would take me under. And I would just be in this fetal position and unable to breathe. I could not breathe, and it was about a minute or two, but I literally would just crumble. I met a woman in Mendocino. Somebody said, look, you got to talk to this woman. She has had a lot of tragedy, and she had come to a place of healing and remarried and all that. But her her stepson died in a motorcycle accident. Her daughter the next year, who the stepson and the daughter were involved, she died of cancer. A year or two later, her husband was murdered at their restaurant. And she had gone through all this tragedy. I said, you need to talk to Sandy. And so I went, and Sandy and I met, and we talked, and we shared our journeys. And that's the beautiful part about deep calling to deep, is that when someone has that, I listen. When someone has that speaks, I listen. I hold that space, and I was in the place where Sandy held that space for me. And she gave me the greatest advice I'd ever gotten. She said, when your heart wants to close, when it just hurts so bad, keep your finger in your heart and don't let it close. And in those waves of pain, I could not breathe. Every muscle was contracted. I was in a fetal position. Everything was gone. And that's all I had left. And I kept my finger in my heart. And what happened was, every time that passed, I had more compassion. I had more understanding. I had more love. So when these things started to hit, okay, I got to go through this. And I had no choice, but I knew at the end that there would be the expanse. That's what the after loss has given me. And that's the gift. I wanted to share one last thing. I don't know how long I've been, but there is one last thing, is that when Matt died, well, let me, 2 last things. Sorry about that, I don't care. 2 last things. I forgot about this, because this is where I wanted to love again. And one of the hardest things that I had to do was to come back into trusting and to being able to love again, to be able to live in that expanse in the finiteness that I'm dealing with, and say, you know, I don't want to walk alone through life. I don't want to push life away. I want to be engaged with life in all areas of my life. So I moved out of Mendocino. I moved to Thailand for a while to teach, and then I met a woman there from England named Rachel. And Rachel and I had this incredible connection, but she was following a spiritual path that wasn't my spiritual path, and I was going this way. And I don't mess with anybody's spiritual path, because you know what spirit is for me, and what the articulation and whatever religion one is for me, it's an attempt to articulate and describe the indescribable. And so whatever verbiage someone uses, that's theirs, and I honor that. It's sacred ground for them, and that's what it is for me, is that ability to, and that attempt to articulate what is indescribable and what is just beyond words. But Rachel was in her own way, and so I left, and she was off to India, and I was off to Australia, and she emailed me, but I never got the emails. But we were a part of a writing group, and what Rachel and I would do would and we just did this on our own, because we really connected. But she was going that way and I was going this way, and it says, well, let's give each other a word. And and then what we get out the email, and I'd get a word, and then just start writing, just stream of consciousness, and then we'd send it back without editing. One of the words she gave me was loss. Yeah, she was brutal, and and this is the first part of the book, because what happened? This is what I wrote to her, and I couldn't figure out how to start the book. So how do you begin something like this? But when she gave me the word loss, I wrote this and I sent it back to her, and she kept it. I don't ever kept anything, but she kept it and she gave it back to me and said, "I want to read this to you, because this is the moment that I spread the ashes of our children." I have to say this. What I did at the end of Matt's life was I exhumed Brian's body. Matt and I went to Half Moon Bay and we spread her ashes. We were going to, and I was going to take Matt's ashes to Half Moon Bay, but Brian had been buried, and so I talked to Matt, and I said to him, "Matt, would you mind if I exhume Brian's body and get his ashes and spread his ashes with your ashes?" And he looked at me and he said, "Well, okay, but just not on the same side of the boat." Okay, brothers, what can you say? but okay, not on the same side. So I did that, and so I got his ashes, and so I really had to do this on the anniversary of Lydia's death, which was February 28th. And it was it was this massive storm at that time. But I had to do it that day, and I had to go out to sea with Matt and Brian's ashes, and to spread them. And it was a boat that was a fishing boat. When Matt and I went out, it was a nice sailboat, and it was nice and gentle, sea and all that. But this was I'd say all I could get was a fishing boat. Sailboats wouldn't go out there, and so they took that. So she gave me the word loss, and this is how I started the book. And it says, "The swollen sea tossed the dilapidated fishing boat like a cork in a hurricane. The captain, lathered in grease and the smell of old fish, gripped the wheel as the wooden vessel sputtered forward to the crest of the swell and descended into a wall of water. The rain swirled in all directions. I sat in the cabin waiting, too sick to be sick. The captain shouted, 'Do what you need to do here. This is as far as we can go.' 13 years of laughter, slumber parties, movies, bedtime stories, hugs and kisses rested in the thick plastic bag. I reached in with my right hand and pulled out a handful of my child. The ash was devoured by the salt water swell. With my left hand, I repeated the ritual with the ash of my 8-month-old, alive tonight, laughter, slumber parties, movies, but full of hugs and kisses. The captain poured all the weight of his boat engines towards land. I sat in the cabin, drenched with salt water, cold rain, and warm tears. A film of wet ash covered each hand, and I stared into the lives of my children. The storm still cried its indignation as I stepped off the boat and walked to the end of the pier. I dipped my hands into the cold, cold sea and watched the ashes drift slowly away. It was my last act as a father." I wrote that to her, just in a stream of consciousness, and sent it to her. She kept that. And she's the one that said, "Start there." And when that happened, it was like all the book just kind of flowed through. And the first part of the book is what we went through, and the second part is coming back to life. And she's so much a part of that. And so I wanted to honor her, because she is to love Rachel doesn't mean I don't love Lydia. That's part of the expanse. And when Lydia was dying, she said, the greatest gift you could give to our relationship is to have another one. Because what you're saying is, this was good enough to do again. And so that was the gift. So when I touch Rachel, I am touching all love. When I touch a child, I'm touching all love. When I am touching a place of sorrow, I'm touching all love. There's only love. When my mother was dying, and I had a brother that just died recently, but when my mother was dying a while back, I was stroking her hair and say, there's only love. There's only love. Lydia gave me that. Brian gave me that. Matt gave me that. My mother gave me that. You give me that. I receive the gift of love. It's how we translate it. A friend of mine said, you know, I can tell you my life, and it can sound like the most horrible, terrible, painful story you've ever heard. And I can tell you my life, and it can sound like the most beautiful, wonderful gift you've ever heard. And it's the same life. I have chosen in my life, as I lean into everything, to choose to say, this is taking me somewhere deep. And I find the footprints, your footprints, in this after loss. I find others. And I find a way to navigate whatever I need to go through. And I will be going through this the rest of my life. I will be reintegrating the rest of my life. I like to call it the unfolding. My life is forever unfolding. Matt's memory, Matt's life, Matt's presence in this moment is forever unfolding. So, finally, I said to Matt, Matt, after I spread your ashes, we were pretty, it was like talking about death was just like talking about, hey, where you want to go to dinner? But said, Matt, after I spread your ashes, how about if I'm going to go to the Monterey Aquarium, and if you're okay, have 3 dolphins jump. And he's thought, okay, no problem. And so after this thing, and it was still stormy, and I drove down from Half Moon Bay to Monterey, which was around an hour and a half or so. I went to the aquarium because that was a special place for us. We love that place. And there's an outdoor amphitheater, and nobody was out there because the storm was raging. And I sat there for hours looking for a dolphin. 3 dolphins to jump. I sat there, I just wanted to know he was okay. And I know everybody in this room knows what that's like, of just wanting to know they're okay. And no dolphins jumped. And I walked away in my emptiness, in my aloneness, in my after loss, with no dolphins jumping. I'm going to tell you the end of the book, so a spoiler alert, but it's not about the ending, because there is no ending. There's always the beginnings. But what happened was about 15 years later, I was sitting up in the Washington Quinault and next to the coast, Washington State, and I was off on this rock, and Rachel with some friends down at the beach, and I was sitting there thinking about how beautiful my life is, what a gift it is, all the blessings that I've received. And I was sitting on this beautiful day because it reminded me so much of Mendocino in my darkest moments. And my most painful moments. And I thought, coming from there, how do you get from there to here? You just go from there to here, every day, inch by inch, moment by moment. And I was sitting on this rock, and I was going, Matt, you never did send those dolphins. Of course, 3 dolphins sauntered by. They didn't jump, they just went by. And I went, I yelled out to Rachel because I thought, am I hallucinating? And I said, look, and I just wanted some proof. 3 dolphins went by. And what I realized then was that I was always looking for Matt to be okay. I just wanted a sign. And in that moment, what he was saying to me was, you're okay. It's okay. You're okay. That was the ultimate gift. And I have to kiss a pedal for that. You're okay. I picked up a rock, and I carry that rock with me. And I carry it wherever I go, and I just touch that rock, and I realize that everything's okay. It's my peace rock. It's my spirit rock. It's my affirmation that I don't need to know he's okay. What the gift was his gift to say, you're okay. It's not easy. It never is. It never will be for me. And I don't know if it ever will be for you, but I hope you never, ever have to go through someone saying, get over it. I hope you never have to go through, why am I still here? Why am I still feeling this way? My answer to that is because I get to go deeper. I get to go into the expanse, that I get to go into the larger context of life and bring back all the beauty and the gifts into this moment and sit with another and go deep, calling to deep. Thank you.